Although Christmas music is over on the radio, we're continuing the Christmas spirit. And I'm just so happy to see so many people serving. I see the next younger generation serving, and it excites me, and I'm super excited for 2021. I don't know about you, but I'm excited. We're going to begin on a promise that, and something that Jesus said in Scriptures. But before I do that, maybe you noticed a new face in our group here. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I mean, our ladies that serve are quite young, so maybe you might mistake them for some of our teens. But Valentina is now part of the leadership team. We're growing, the church is growing, and I'm just so thankful to God for all the opportunities He's given us. I think that 2021 is a huge year for a lot of opportunities. I think 2020 was a big year for opportunities, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. We're going to get started with God's assurance He gave to Israel, and He's given that same assurance to us today, and that's written in Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Open up your Bibles to Isaiah 41, verse 10. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. I will help thee. I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. You may be seated. Ruvim, Atniel, great job, guys. I remember my first time when I sermoned. I think the stand was right there in the middle, and it was 2008, and I was terrified. I was full of fear. I actually had the recording, and I stumbled upon it when I was looking through some of my old hard drives, and I was like, wow, boy, was I scared. I could tell, and you guys could probably tell, and fear is something we have to overcome. We're going to talk about fear tonight, but I want to read a quote. And maybe you know this quote, maybe you've heard this quote, and it sounds like this: "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." You know who said that? What great speaker said that? He alone who owns the youth gains the future. Maybe you know, I'll tell you guys here in a second, but those are real important words because they're so true. What we put into our children depicts the future. These children, and then these teens, and then the youth, they are the future of the church, they are the future of the community, and they are the future. These words were said by Adolf Hitler. You might be surprised. He was a great speaker. He knew what he wanted to accomplish, and he started with the youth. And there's a reason he started with the youth and the young. What we pour into our children today will be the outcome in the future, and sometimes that passes so quick. I'm looking at my older daughter who's going to be 6 in May, and some of the things she says sometimes, I'm like, what? When does she get so mature, even though she's only 5? And all you parents here tonight, you can relate with me. A lot of you parents have gone through older kids now. Maybe they're already in youth. Maybe they're already on their own, married. Maybe you're a grandpa, or maybe you're a new grandma or grandpa. And you see how quick time flies. But it's so important that we put into our children, not a fancy new toy, not a fancy new building, our children. That's where our focus needs to be, and I think 2020 has given us an opportunity to reflect on our life and give us an opportunity to see how we're doing spiritually. We'll talk about that here tonight. Because regardless of what's happening in the world, we're going to keep moving, we're going to keep growing, and we're going to keep gathering as much as we can. We don't know what 2021 will look like. It's all going to be a big surprise for us, I guess. But I guess that's being human. We don't know what will happen. 2020 has been a wonderful year. And you might be looking at me like, Yara, where have you been? What planet are you on? 2020 has been a difficult year. It's been a hard year. It's got a lot of surprises, hardships. But it's also been a year that's given us a revelation or a chance to look at our life. And fear, I think, is something that it's taught a lot us about. How much fear can impact us and others around us. It's interesting because the angel said, fear not. He said that to the shepherds. He said that to Mary. He said that to Joseph. Fear not. Those 2 words. I strongly believe in the following quote. If you're not challenging yourself, you're not growing yourself. If you're not challenging yourself, you're not growing. If you are just warm and you're okay where you're at, you're not growing. It is so crucial for us to grow and to learn upon our mistakes and to just be a better Christian every day. 2020 has given us the opportunity to grow. It's given us an opportunity to step back and really look at what's important in our life. A friend of mine called me last month, and he asked me a question. We were talking about ministry, He asked me a question. He said, what one piece of advice would you offer me as a prospective youth minister or pastor? What one piece of advice would you offer me as a prospective youth minister or pastor? What would you answer to that? If someone asked you that question and you had to answer him right there on the spot, you didn't have time to prepare this huge answer, pretty answer, what would you say to them? My answer was pretty simple. It had 4 words, and I said, remember why you started. Remember why you started. Oftentimes we forget why we start, and that's why we stop. We'll talk about that tonight as well. Why are you doing what you are doing? Why are you serving where are you serving? Why do you go where you go? A lot of times when we start something is because God has really had a huge moment in our life where we know that that's something we need to do. He gave us a vision to pursue. Sometimes it's because we have to do something, like there's nobody else to do it. So you say yes, and I'll start and I'll do something. Sometimes it's because we just care about something. Sometimes it's because we have a huge vision or a passion for something. But we start things for different reasons. But why do we stop? Why do we forget why we start? Try to remember yourself last year. Maybe you made some goals. Maybe you made some, checklist of what you want to accomplish for 2020. Who here, maybe raise your hand, who here did that for last year? Had some goals they wanted to achieve in 2020? I don't see a single hand. I'm a little disappointed. Have you guys made a goal this year, 2020? When you were in 2019, did you guys make a goal?
Sure.
Anybody else? Just me and Victor, I guess. Huh? I'm sure you have. You made some goals. You had a vision for 2020. Sure, it kind of went a little differently than maybe you expected, right? Here we are today. Still don't know what's going to happen. But we made some goals. We had some aspirations. We had some milestones we wanted to meet. But why were they not met? And I would say there's 2 reasons why we stop. There's 2 reasons why we don't accomplish what we set forth. And the number one thing is we make excuses. Simple as that. We just make an excuse for something. If you want to lose some weight, you made an excuse and say, well, this donut's not going to be that big of a problem. Or I'll just work out tomorrow. I've been there. I think I gained like 4 pounds over this holiday season. Hopefully I'll lose it. I don't know. It's getting tougher as I get older. The second thing of why we stop is because fear gets bigger than our faith. If I had a visual here tonight, it'd be a lion, a real live lion. Obviously, I can't make that happen. But a lion. A lot of times, our faith is smaller than the fear. Our faith needs to be bigger than our fears. We're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to focus on that second thing of why we stop, that fear being bigger than our faith. And this year alone has been a year of where people have been living in fear. A simple excuse I've heard so many times. And it sounds like this. Due to COVID, I didn't blank, fill in the blank. Due to COVID, I wasn't able to accomplish this. Due to COVID, I just hear it all around me. We find an excuse, we make it comfortable to say, well, I didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish because of something else. And we just put a blame somewhere else. But the truth is, a lot of times we try to avoid the things that make us scared. Who here is scared of wasps or bees? So you don't really look forward to hitting that nest off your house. We're scared of things that to approach things that give us fear. And this year, we've had a lot of that. But living in fear will make you stop living out your calling. Living in fear will make you stop doing what you started at one point in your life. As a Christian, as a leader, as a father, as a mother, it'll make you stop doing what you were called to do. The Bible talks a lot about fear. And tonight's a perfect time to talk about fear because the Christmas story, as mentioned in the morning by Brother Alex, there was a lot of scary things happening during that time. A lot of times we picture it as a perfect starlight story. But the story of Christmas is one that has a lot of fear or fearful moments in it. So tonight as we dive into our word, I hope that it serves as an encouragement to all of us to see how 2 simple words can have the way you look at these 2 simple words will give you a different outlook on your life. And they're the words, fear not. Just those 2 words, fear not. These 2 words will change the way you think. They will change the the things that you do, act, and they'll impact those around you. Let's take a look at Mary. The angel appears to Mary. We're looking at Luke chapter 1. And Ruvim has already read Luke chapter 2, so this is perfect. Thank you. We didn't talk about what he was going to talk about. This is perfect. God's good. Luke chapter 1, verse 28. I'm going to read a couple of verses. Hail, thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying. She was troubled when she hears these words from the angel. And cast in her mind what manner of salutation this should be. In verse 30, the angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. And this is where we see our very first lesson we can learn for ourselves. Finding favor in God conquers fear. When you find favor in God, you make your fear smaller than your faith. You make your faith larger than your fear. When you find favor in God. The angel then goes into details of what would to come, what's going to happen. Mary asks some questions. She's a little concerned. She's troubled. This is a lot to take in at once. You know, sometimes when someone shares some news with you and you don't know how to take it in or how to react, you're just silent. You have some questions. Well, Mary had some questions. She was concerned. And the angel says, he shares what would happen. And then he says, For with God nothing shall be impossible. This is verse 37. For with God nothing shall be impossible. And here's Mary's answer. She says, Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. She accepted what would to come. She knew that wasn't going to be easy. Let alone wait till Joseph finds out. She had a lot to take in, but she decided to say yes. Her answer was yes. Mary was able to accept the struggle only because she was going to do that with God. She knew that she wasn't going to do this on her own. She was going to do this and complete this mission with God. Only through him. And she understood that this long road would be a long road with suffering, but would also be a road that showed blessings, because hardships and overcoming hardships brings blessings. She had to consistently remind herself of why she started, of why she said yes. And doesn't mean it's going to be easy. When you say yes to God, when you say yes to Jesus, your road doesn't become easy. You're going to have some hardships. This year has given us a lot of hardships that we had to overcome. And the struggles that the world throws at you, they're going to be hard. They're going to try to break you down. But you will overcome if you do it with God. Overcoming fear is a process. A lot of times we think that overcoming our fear is just simple or it's fast. But a fear is a really real thing in your mind. You actually experience something. It's an emotion. So you can't just say, well, just don't be scared. It's easy to say that to our children maybe. Don't be scared of the dark. But it's a real thing in our mind. So it's a process to overcome fear. Because although you know that you don't know how life might turn around or how you'll go through something, you'll know that God is helping you every step of the way. And there's this misconception in our Christian faith that says if you are a believer, you shouldn't have fear. You're going to experience fear in your life, but it's what you do with those actions when you experience fear that makes a difference. When you rely on God. You have to make a decision to battle fear every day. Mary Joseph did that. We can see the outcome. We can even see the whole path that they had to overcome. The hardships, the fear. They had to run. They had to make it. They had to give birth to Jesus, the Son of God, in a place they had no idea where. When we decide to overcome fear with God, we start to see the world in a different way. We start to look at our fears in a different way. We challenge them in a different way. It's kind of like when you're a little child and you're, turning off the lights in your house, and say you have a hallway and there's about 3 light switches, and you turn one off and you run real fast to the next one, turn that one off and run real fast to the next one. Has anyone done that? Maybe the children here today still do that. Maybe the teens still do that. I don't know. Maybe your teen still does that. Why are we scared of the dark? I mean, we know there's nobody in the house. We know that you're in a safe place, but yet somehow between one light switch to the next, you're terrified to look back. The light brings you peace and some peace and security. By the time you make it to your bedroom, you're at peace. You slam the door shut and you're safe. But at what point do we stop being scared of the dark? At what point do we don't look back and we're not scared to look back because we know what's in front of us is more important? At what point do we start to look at the dark in a different way? It happens in all of our lives. We get older and we somehow turn off light switch and going to your room doesn't become a problem anymore. It's a very simple example from your childhood, right? But that's how we experience fear in our lives. The same fears that once troubled you as a kid are now magnified in a different way as an adult. Maybe we don't share that with our kids, much enough. Overcoming fear is a process and it takes time. But fear is either a made-up monster that we create in our imagination, but sometimes fear is a real thing that's affecting our life. But it requires you to battle it with God, either way. Regardless if it's a made-up fear that doesn't really exist, or if it's a fear that's really impacting your life or your family. The word fear is mentioned in the Bible 404 times, and the word afraid is mentioned 193 times. Now, that's more than enough to remind you every single day of the year to conquer it. It's interesting. Let us open our Bibles to Matthew chapter 1, verse 19. Matthew chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. We'll read two verses there. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privately. But while he thought on these things, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary thy wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Ghost. We picture the Christmas story as a peaceful story in starlight, as a silent night. We sing about it too. But that night was a very frightful night, especially the one when they were actually traveling and looking for a place to stay. Amongst thousands of other people that were squirming around trying to look for a room to stay, they too were looking for a room, except they had to also have a new baby that night. Now, many of you who have had a baby know how the first nights go. It's tough. Very scary times, and not only then, but later on, they had to run. They were instructed to run so they could be safe. But through it all, God doesn't leave them. Through it all, God is with them every step of the way, instructing them what to do. And He is with you every step of the way. Sometimes we feel like we're not good enough, and that, Mary and Joseph, they were special people. And only they could understand God's voice. Or only they could see a vision from the angel. But God is speaking to every one of us tonight as well. And He has been this year. Maybe because you haven't heard it because you haven't been listening. You haven't been focused. We've been distracted by all this media going around. It's been an interesting year. The angel God later tells him the angel instructs him to go back to the land of Israel upon the death of King Herod. And the struggle doesn't end there. But those first 9 months were probably the hardest when they were starting the path, when they were starting this new journey. 9 months until they saw the birth of Jesus. And these last 9 months in our life, and this year, have probably been a pretty interesting 9 months, wouldn't you say? We've learned a lot in 9 months. Probably also learned how you deal with fear at this point. You can talk to different people around you, and everyone faces fear differently. But everyone has to do it. At this point, we're all living in the same world. If we don't learn to conquer our fears now, the next few years will be even harder. That's why it's so important to learn to conquer fear. If you don't learn to conquer it now, it'll be even harder later. I do still believe that 2020 was a year of blessings because it's given us the opportunity to see where we're not ready, see where we need some work spiritually, see how much more we need to rely on God. It's shown us the areas of the church that are weak. It's shown us the areas, this year alone, team ministry has been the hardest year in team ministry, in my opinion. There's a lot of struggles we had to overcome, and we're still struggling with things. It's been a year that's given us a taste of where we're headed. If you believe that we're just going to jump back to the normal, I think you're greatly mistaken. God's given us a chance to wake up. God's given us a chance to look at our life, reflect, and grow, and it's an opportunity to make 2021 a different year for us. To not be afraid. Because everybody else around you is going to want you to be more afraid in 2021. 2020 was just a taste of what's to come. 2021, we got to be stronger. We've had 9 months to prepare for the journey to come. I think it's important for us to stick together and be stronger as Christians more than ever before. A lot of times we think about our grandpa and grandma and what they had to overcome. But the thing is, the new generation doesn't quite know the full story of how hard it was for them. The older population, maybe my parents, your parents, or maybe your grandparents, they know they've gone through some real big hardships and struggles. But it's been a pretty easy life, I would say, in America for the last couple of decades. And so the youth, I don't think, is as prepared as we need to be. The next generation is as prepared. They're still taking this as vacation time. Things might get harder, but we have to remember to overcome these fears that are going to be in our life. So today I want to talk about the fear not process, or a few steps we can take essential steps we can take to not be afraid, to not live in fear. And to find his favor, remember his promise and God's words over man's words. So first and foremost, we must understand that we can't overcome fear without God. We can't do this alone, and we know that by now. But the only way to lose fear is to grow with God every single day. We've stepped away from faith. A lot of us have stepped away and have taken a vacation from the growth of spiritual growth. So how do we find his favor? Let's read Proverbs 9:10 and Proverbs 13:15. Proverbs 9:10 reads, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding." Proverbs 13:15 reads, "Good understanding giveth favor." So if the beginning of wisdom and knowledge is of the holy is understanding, and good understanding giveth favor, we must have fear to lose fear. We must fear God in order to not fear the worldly things. Interesting, huh? Find his favor by losing fear. You must have fear, but the fear of God. Those are two different types of fears. The fear of the Lord is not the same as the fear of the bad things that we're experiencing in our world today. It is not the same. Fear of the Lord acknowledges that God is good and he has intentions for us in our life. It's produced by God's word, and it makes a person receptive to the wisdom and understanding and knowledge when we're receptive to that understanding. And that's when you find the favor in God. When we find the favor in God, you'll live a life that's bigger, that your faith is bigger than your fears. Number 2, remembering his promise. The words we started in the beginning, the quote in Isaiah 41:10, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. I will help thee. I will uphold thee." All these promises that God has given us. And not just in that text, but in many other texts in the Bible, we can see that repetitive message of God being there for us. I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. I will be with you. And somehow, even though knowing that God is on our side, we still get frightful at moments. It's a common theme across the scriptures. If you look at any Bible character, even when we talked about Esther, or David or any biblical character, we can see that they had to overcome fear to see their blessing. Matthew 10:19 reads, "But when they deliver you up, take no thought how or what ye shall speak, for it shall be given you in that same hour what you shall speak." We like to jump into the future and know the answers, but we don't know. What we do know is that we should not be in a fearful state of our heart. God is already there. God already knows what's going to happen. And he'll take care of us. He'll take care, and you'll know how to act. It's not a bad idea to be prepared, though. We see countless examples that show God of how he supports his people who have found favor in him. Number 3, God's words over man's words. In a world that we live in right now that believes in everything that the media is telling them and what the governor is telling them, we have begun to believe man's voice over God's voice. We have begun to take truth from what we hear instead of truth from what has already been told to us. And we've begun to allow fear to drive us instead of faith. And our fear has become bigger than our faith. We begin to live differently, gather differently, interact differently. Just a matter of months, it became weird to shake someone's hand. And maybe in your business world or people who you work with, you've noticed that. You go out for a handshake and they don't know what to do with it. They maybe give you a fist pump. Or maybe they just like, let's stay our 6 feet apart and we'll be fine. We've begun to live our lives differently due to the fear that the world has brought upon us. The big question is why? Why do we act differently now than ever before? Because the numbers? Because the mandate? Because the governor? Because you can get sick? Maybe you're terrified. Maybe you're living in fear and you're scared of COVID-19. The reason we have faith today is because people of God were not living in fear. They weren't scared to get sick. They were ready to die for God. They were ready to keep the vision going, and they were ready to die, and they did die for us to have faith today. We are believers today because people in the past have decided to live a life without fear. They began looking at life differently. They found a blessing to serve God. When they were being killed, they were singing psalms. You might think, how in the world can you be blessing people who are killing you? That's a state of our mind. We still have time to prepare our hearts. How far are we willing to go for the gospel? You have a higher chance, let me tell you, this is facts, and this is from the CDC. You have a higher chance of dying on your way home tonight than you do from COVID-19, regardless of your age. Doesn't matter if you're old or young. You have a higher chance on coming home tonight and dying in a car wreck than you do of dying from COVID-19. And we know these facts, but we live life differently. You have a higher chance of dying from cancer, much higher chance, a 14% higher chance. Yet no one's overreacting on cancer today. And cigarettes are selling like hotcakes. You have a higher chance of accidentally drowning than you do from dying from COVID-19. I don't know how many of you guys are swimmers. I'm terrified of swimming. I'm not a good swimmer. The only time I swim is when we had kids camps and you had to make it there and back just to get a little bracelet so you can swim. And even then I was terrified. Maybe my teens didn't know it, but I only did it so they could do it. I'm not a strong swimmer. By the time I'm there and back, I'm exhausted. I have a higher chance of dying in that situation than I do from COVID-19. You have a higher chance of dying from toxic substance than you do from COVID. One quick story before we wrap up tonight. I used to volunteer at a fire department in Puyallup, and I used to take the night shift because I had work during the day. I had 20 to 25 hours that I had to work, so those were my night shifts that I worked. And one night, I especially remember, it was September of last year, and it was September the 13th. It ended up being a Friday. So the other firefighters I was working with were making fun of that day. They're like, hey, guys, we're going to get a crazy call tonight. It's Friday the 13th. If you don't know anything about Friday the 13th, maybe the older generation, ask your kids what Friday the 13th is. So some people are terrified of a special date or, So they were just laughing and saying, we're going to get a big call. Now, we didn't get a lot of calls. Like sometimes we were lucky to get on a call because it was a smaller department that served a smaller area. And so we didn't really think much about it. We all laughed, went to sleep, and, called it a night. And that night, about 4 a.m., we get a call. And usually you hear on the sirens and you get a little thing on your phone. And it said, Incident 1, Level 1, Hazmat. Hazmat is hazardous material, something chemically reactive. Something has happened with a chemical that we don't know what it is yet. It's pretty short. It just says respond. You just go. You just wake up and you go. So at 4 a.m., we head out to a call, all in our gear and air tanks and all. Adrenaline is as high as ever before. You don't really know what to do with yourself. I think that's the most amount of energy I've ever had in my life. And we responded to a hazardous material leak. Our job was to find where the leak was and what the leak, the placard on the big metal container on what that chemical was, so we can let everybody know if we need to set a perimeter, see how dangerous this thing is. Well, we couldn't find the placard. We couldn't find the little thing that said this is what chemical this is. But we already had people that were dizzy and people who were running out, and one person who had to get hospitalized that was working at that facility. Long story short, we found out that material, that chemical or that substance was called anhydrous ammonia, which, depending on the amount, could either kill you or do nothing to you. So your chances were either high or low to survive. I mean, great things that there's protective gear, right? If only we lived our life in the same way and had our protective fates to keep us safe. Long story short, I wasn't supposed to be there that night. I actually wasn't supposed to respond to that call. I didn't know. I was kind of the fresh one with the volunteer department, right? Well, apparently, due to staffing and whatnot, I was there. And I could have died that night, and not even knowing why I would have died for. I had a higher chance of dying that night than I will ever have from COVID-19 or any other continual flu, cold, or a different strand of COVID. A lot of times we begin to listen to man's voice over God's voice. And when we do that, we live in fear. I lived in fear when COVID just hit. I was terrified. I didn't know how dangerous this was with my family. I have kids to feed. I have a family to grow. I have to stay healthy. So I was terrified. So yes, I took all precautions. But over time, you get to see what the man's voice is telling you and what God's voice is telling you. You have to make a decision on where you want to live. You can't be both places. For right now, I think America still has it better than a lot of other countries, and you probably agree with me if you're watching some of the news. If you're not watching the news, you're either blessed or not blessed. It depends on what you're watching. But you should be well informed of where our world is going. You should be well informed of where faith is taking a turn, where the attack on the Christian faith is leading. Whose voice are you listening to today? God's voice or man's voice? It's normal to question things when the unpredictable happens in our life. When the angel appeared to Mary, she didn't see that coming. She questioned him. But she didn't let her initial reaction control her action. We can see her actions follow through, and her living without fear. She lived in faith instead of fear. And that's why God chose Mary and Joseph. They were people who said yes and who didn't look back. They remembered why they said yes. They remembered why they started. Maybe you recall that night when you said yes to Jesus. And maybe there have been a lot of years that passed and you've been kind of just lukewarm. Maybe you forgot why you started. they were able to live by those words, fear not, amongst living in the most frightful times. We don't have someone running around trying to kill our family right now, yet. Yet we're living in more fear than Mary and Joseph were. You might say, well, they were chosen people, Yarrow. Mary and Joseph, they were chosen people. You are chosen by God. Every person who says yes to Jesus, you are chosen to lead. You are chosen to make a difference in the community you live in. And he wants to have you live without fear. He wants to uphold you. And maybe you're in need of more strength from Jesus. Maybe you're in need of hearing his voice more today. Maybe you want the new year to be a difference. Maybe you want to live life without fear in 2021. It's going to be a process. But he will give you strength. He will uphold you. Let us stand to our feet as we pray. And if Jesus is knocking on your heart, if you are tired of living in fear, and you've lost that vision that you once started with your walk with Christ, I encourage you to make a change in your heart tonight. If you've been listening to everybody else's voices instead of God's voice, if you forgot his favor in you, and you might think that you are not good enough, or that you've gone astray. As we pray tonight, wherever you are, maybe you're at home on your sofa, maybe you're at the dinner table, maybe you're watching this months later. If you are here tonight, from where you are standing, or if you decide to come forward, make a change to live in faith, not in fear. And make your faith bigger than your fear. Remember your odds. You never know what's going to happen in your life. You don't know what the next day brings. We don't know what's going to happen tonight. I want everyone to remember his promise. He's promised to support us. He's promised to give us strength and uphold us. And in Revelation 3:20, he says, if any man hear my voice, and open the door, I will come into him. And I will sup with him and he with me. If you answer the door and you say yes, he will be with you. It doesn't have to be a special ritual. It doesn't have to be a special place. From wherever you are, all you have to do is say yes to Jesus. And if you've been tired of living a very different life, make that change tonight. I encourage you to make that change before you leave here tonight, before you go to bed tonight. We don't know what 2021 will look like, but what I do know is that God hasn't left us. And our spiritual life shouldn't have changed with the pandemic. Instead, it should have grown. So if you want to grow, and if you want to say yes to Jesus, make that tonight. Let us pray.